what happens here?
Mhm.
Okay, cool. I think we're both recording now. Yeah, we are.
Lovely.
Well, Magali, can I give your little introduction here?
Please.
Okay, cool. So, welcome everybody. We're so excited to hear about Magali and what she has to say about children and the natal chart. So, just a little background on Magali. She's a master's in social work, is a Mexican-Guatemalan evolutionary astrologer, spiritual counselor, and shamanic practitioner, and now serves as OPA's vice president and representative of ethics and international satellites. Magali has done extensive work in the field of healing, trauma, and dismantling oppression, and she is an activist at the intersection of social and climate justice. She offers astrological and healing services in both English and Spanish. And I've been lucky enough to take a few peer groups with Magali. So I know she's brilliant when it comes to parent-child relations. So I'm really excited for this one, Magali.
Thank you so much, Mal. And this is an opportunity not only to say that I'm really honored to be working for OPA in these capacities, but that now you are the International Satellites representative. So, yay.
Okay.
Hmm. All
Uh,
right. Well, welcome, everyone. Is there anything else, Mal?
that's it. And I'll just let the attendees know if they have a question during your
Mhm.
presentation, they can drop it in the chat and we'll either answer it. If it feels relevant enough, we'll answer it in the moment or we'll save some of the questions for the last 10 minutes.
Sounds wonderful. I'll keep an eye on the chat if I can, but I won't do that the whole time. So thank you for facilitating that, Mal. So welcome everyone. It's a joy to be here with you today. I wish I could see your faces. I would love that, but I'm just going to trust that you're there and you're listening. I am going to speak about astrology for parents, using astrology to support parents and help their children thrive, which I think astrology is such a beautiful discipline to accomplish that. Oh, here we go. So first, I want to start by giving a land acknowledgement. This is something that we are encouraged to do in the United States, which is the occupied territory of many indigenous tribes that lived here before colonization. And you'll forgive me, I'm a very bad singer, but I'm going to sing this to you so that we can all really feel it together. And my voice is a little raspy today, but we're just gonna do this. This is indigenous land. It was never ceded. It was roughly taken at the hand of colonization. This is the land of the Uipi and Zayanti tribes of the Awaswas Nation, whose people were decimated, but their legacy remains. Today, this land is represented by the Amamutsun tribal band, who are fulfilling their commitment to Creator, to conserve it. Thank you. So yes, I am Mexican and Guatemalan. I come from the land of the Nahuatl and Maya people, but I live in California in the ancestral lands of the Awaswas Nation. So thank you for being with me while acknowledging this. So another little bit about who I am. Mal gave me a very kind introduction. These are my big three. I am a Scorpio sun, Libra moon. I have Gemini rising. And my first career was as a translator and interpreter. So I speak 5 languages, but the ones that I speak best are my own, Spanish and English. And then I have had a long career in healing work. I was a psychotherapist for 15 years, working mostly around healing trauma and with families. I became an evolutionary astrologer. I studied with Stephen Forrest. And also I am a shamanic practitioner. I am also an activist. You heard about that. And I work with OPA as vice president and as a representative of ethics. And I'm also a mother. And this is important, bringing it into this conversation today, because I was a family therapist for 15 years before I became a mother. And I thought I knew some things, but really the journey of motherhood has been profoundly humbling. I like to say that I eat humble pie every day. So I will bring some of this new humility into this process. And one of the results also of having a child and being her main caregiver, and, in fact, stopping work while I was parenting. I mean, parenting is also work, but I pretty much brought my sessions to a standstill while my daughter was very young, is that I spent a lot of time with other mothers and fathers and parents and other children, really observing their commonalities and their differences and the challenges that came with parenting. So that is folded into this conversation as well. And I'd like to know a little bit about who you are. And for this, we can use the chat. Are you a parent, or like one of our attendees, do you work in the perinatal, field? Or do you have children who are important to you in your life? And do you think your parents would have better supported you if they'd had access to astrological knowledge? Nice. So we have a parent and social worker like me. Thank you, Amy. More parents and social workers. Yes. And an auntie. Beautiful. People who work with children in pediatric settings, grandparents. Excellent. Yes. So even, if we are astrologers without children, and that's what I was for a long time, the truth is that we will interact with parents as part of our work all the time, right? And I don't know about you, but for me, my mom was interested in astrology when I was a child, and she would just read, sun sign columns and kind of dime store books about astrology. That's what was available at the time. Oh, lovely. We have a Salvadorian grandmother. And I remember something very salient. At some point, my mother was reading about me being a Scorpio, and she gave me a journal that you could lock. So when I was, starting to write, I don't know, I was like 10 or 11 years old. And because my mother read in a book, in an astrology book, that I had a tendency to be secretive and that I needed some kind of, privacy, she gave me a journal that I could lock so that it could be private. And that always stuck with me. I was very grateful to my mother for doing that for me. So yeah. And do you think you would have been better supported if your parents or caregivers had access to astrological knowledge? Oh, that's an interesting point, Irene, that sometimes we forget that the child's birth chart is, represents transits for the parents. True, absolutely true. Great. So, well, you all know about astrology, so it sounds like everybody's pretty sure of this. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we bring more astrology into the fields of supporting children? Because the other thing is that, the educational system that most children are exposed to is not really accommodating of all their different personalities, right? So many people are, set on making the child fit the school or making the child fit the educational setting. But what I want us to do, I want us to revolutionize education. And what I want us to do is to transform our educational systems to better fit the children. Yes. Well, thank you for all this interaction in the chat. It's been super, super sweet. Okay, so what kind of world are our children inheriting? Humanity is going through some really intense rites of passage now, right? This is a difficult time. Sometimes we call it the Anthropocene, the era where humanity has changed climate to such a great degree that we have put our lives in danger. So we need to be thoughtful about how we're raising young people with the challenges that are in front of them. We can't assume that things are going to be the same as they were before. And as you all know, I won't talk about the climate for too long, but we just had a record-breaking summer in the Northern Hemisphere all over the world, and many, many places have been devastated by climate disasters. So we need to think about this as well when we talk about children. And these are just a few photographs. My poor child, she's been marching on the streets, demonstrating for justice since she was very young. So this is me and my husband and daughter, Sophia. And here we are at various demonstrations that she's been part of. Well, I don't know. And I see, Irene, your question. I'm not going to refer to the chat the whole time, but what I do want to say is I don't know how much power we have to influence the educational system, but I think we need to try. And already there are some places that are trying that. Okay, so first I'd like to just discuss a few ethical issues around doing astrology with children. Obviously, most of the chart readings that I do for young children are for the parents, and that's why there is an emphasis on parenting. The youngest people who have come to me for readings have been 15 or 16, which is older than the age of consent in the place where I live. So I live in California in the United States, and the age of consent for health services here is 14. I know that some of you live in places where teenagers are not able to consent to receive their own services. And even though astrology is obviously not a medical field, but, in the whole realm of counseling professions, it is important for us to inform ourselves of what are the legalities regarding that work. And an astrology reading done for a teenager, for an older teenager, is very different than one done for a parent of a very young child, or even an older child, but the reading done for a parent around parenting, and very different from a reading done for an adult who's already had a lot of life experience. So in accordance with the ethical tendencies of OPA, I would like to emphasize that we don't do a lot of prediction when it comes to reading young people's charts. And I'll talk about why. So let's look at this screen. So first of all, the age of consent, right? So we should only do consultations, like I said, with young people when they are old enough to consent to services in your geographical area. And then when we do readings for parents, the aim should always be to empower. It shouldn't be to scare or to plant, difficult information, or to make self-fulfilling prophecies. I'll talk about that down below here. Next, the issue of having a power differential between the astrologer and the client becomes a little bit more tricky when it comes to children's charts. So I think we have to really conduct ourselves with a lot of care. I always make a promise to my clients that I will never tell them what to do, but I will inform them of their options and of what I see. So I think it's really helpful to get away from the language of giving advice and to be in the language of consultation, where we're in dialogue and the client brings their life experience into the consultation room, and we illuminate with information and options, but we never say to people that they should do something. I think that is a way to practice in, to ensure that we do no harm, but also to practice from a very respectful attitude. Beware of blaming the victim. Oh my gosh, this is huge. It's important to stay compassionate all the time. Life is hard and parenting is really hard. And so instead of, making kind of simple explanations, and instead of oversimplifying things or just assuaging people, it's important to look at the complexities, but to stay very compassionate, right? Parents have it very difficult, especially mothers. Mothers get blamed for so many things in our society. Mothers work so hard and have such an unfair, receive such an unfair share of things like blame. So I think in this case, compassion is extremely, extremely important. And then beware of creating self-fulfilling prophecies or overly negative expectations. So this is what I was talking about, right? I mean, I admit that even when I look at my daughter's chart, she has Pluto in the same house as my husband and I do, in the fourth. I don't want to interpret her Pluto in the fourth, honestly. And I don't have to yet, right? It can mean so many things. But I think when we look at a child's chart, we should really just be thinking about how can this parent support this child to best effect? How can they support their gifts, help them with their challenges, and help them navigate life and find, their place of thriving? So very important to not predict and rather, give a range of possibilities. And even in this case, like, not go too far into the future, because we don't know yet how some of these themes are going to show up in a child's life. I'll give you some examples today of some pretty surprising developments that I don't think any astrologer can see coming necessarily. And so most important is to listen to the client's circumstances, right? I always talk about the chart is the map and the lived experience of the client is the territory. And just like the map of California doesn't have any bears or mountains on it, the chart is a pretty flat description without the added territory of the lived experience of the client. So really what we do is a dialogue to connect those two, right? We use astrological information to bring more meaning and to empower. That is always the goal. And I think above all, what's really enriching about doing astrology with parents is to teach them to think archetypally. Like that father I'll respond to your question in just a moment, Pearl. Like that father who brought me his daughter. His daughter was 8 years old. She was coming in for psychotherapy because her mother had been psychiatrically hospitalized. And the father said to me, "Can you please make my daughter less dramatic?" And then I looked at her chart and she had the moon in Scorpio. And I thought, well, this child has big emotions, right? This is not something you can change. So what we ended up talking about is what activities can this child do where the expression of her emotions is welcome, so that she doesn't have to fit herself into a space that doesn't work, but that on the contrary, she has an outlet for her true personality. I see your question, Pearl. Do you read for teens if their parents do not know of the event? And do they mostly come with a specific ask versus just general? Well, in my limited experience reading for teens, let's see, I had one teenager whose grandmother paid for the reading and gave it as a gift. I had another one whose mother paid for the reading. So the parents or guardians were aware of this and they trusted me. They had a relationship with me and they trusted me to do this well. And then one of those teenagers bought a reading for one of her best friends. And her best friend, I don't know if her parents knew, but she was above the age of consent in California. So I guided myself through that. And also when I was talking to this young woman, I was able to gauge a little bit about her level of maturity. And because I conducted myself with this kind of ethical approach of not making, vast predictions, I think it was a pretty successful reading, and I didn't, wander into very, difficult territory. I hope this answers your question. But yeah, I think that the biggest thing, I shudder to think about the astrologers who sit down with a parent and say, like, oh, your child might become a drug addict or might be incarcerated, right? I mean, those are the self-fulfilling prophecies and overly negative expectations that we never want to plant in a parent's mind. And that honestly, we have no way of knowing, right? So at least in my approach as an evolutionary astrologer, what I like to think about is the whole range, every astrological archetype as having a continuum between its most positive expression and its most negative expression, and how, then there's free will. And many of us kind of navigate somewhere in the middle, and, you can lean more to one side or to the other. But to remind the client that there is free will, that there is room to move, and that ultimately the goal of our lessons, as seen through astrology, is to grow and evolve. Okay. Thank you. I hope that makes sense. So how can we unlock the power of astrology in helping parents raise their children? By teaching them to think archetypally and ultimately providing an individual and contextualized psychological theory for each child. Don't be scared by the word theory. What I mean here is, having spent time in the field of mental health, one of the problems I see is that most psychological theories are applied to people blankly, right? They're applied to everyone without enough understanding of individual differences. And our tool, astrology, gives us great insight into individual differences. And that's why, in a way, every consultation is an individual theory about how this person is meant to develop, right? So, for example, introverts are very misunderstood in educational settings and in other social settings. But we can see through astrology when somebody has very introverted energy and there's a lot happening under the surface, right? And we can validate that. And in that way, we really create a much more individualized way to respond to a person and their challenges. Okay. And of course, a consultation must consider much more than the birth chart. There's a lot of information that is not included in the birth chart. For example, sexual orientation or level of consciousness, or what kind of neighborhood you live in, right? Or what is what is your ethnicity? So when we approach our clients, we're going to be looking at their birth chart, and we need to be listening for some of these other elements, right? So here I made this chart. I don't know if it's very representative, but beyond the birth chart itself, we psychological astrologers at least think about the attachment process, right? How successful was the attachment process between this child and their parents and their family? How nurturing is this family? How accepting is it? And then we think about their social context. What is their ethnicity? Are they immigrants? Are they a racial minority? Do they live in a wealthy or a poor neighborhood? Any of these things could be true. And then the historical context, right? Are we looking at a time and place where women are empowered, or at a very sexist, cultural context? Are we looking at, are we looking at the Anthropocene, right? These children are born into a world where the climate is essentially broken, and we are going to continue to have like large scale disasters. This is a fact, that's been proven in the news every day for the last few years, but also that that is really, supported by science. So what are we going to do about it? How are we going to face that? How are we going to build survival skills and courage and community-minded approaches into these children so that they can learn to thrive in their own way? And then beyond all that is the unknowable mystery, right? There's things that we will never understand, that we will never know. And even when we have a chart in front of us, there's other mysterious things that can influence that person's life. We think about the planets that have been discovered in the last 150, 200 years, and there are many people who did astrology without knowing about those planets or the asteroids and so on. So we evolve, astrology evolves, and also there's always an unknowable mystery. Okay, so we actually know a lot about what children need to thrive. And it's strange to have worked in the field of psychology and mental health because psychology does not have a definition of health. Did you know that? Psychology does not have a definition of health. It has 360 definitions of mental illness, but it doesn't have a true definition of health. And so there's this team, these people called the Search Institute, who created a proposal of what a human being needs to thrive. And actually, it's not a proposal, it's a science-based study. And they came up with something called the 40 developmental assets. And I wanted to show them to you today so that we get an idea. Like, yes, we do know these things. We do know that children need, family support and support from other adults, a caring neighborhood, right? They need empowerment. They need a community that values children, sees them as resources. They need boundaries and expectations, right? This feels so important. If a neighborhood is supportive of children, then, children can't get away with doing a lot of, getting into some dangerous mischief because there's many adults and many people, like, in a caring way looking after them, right? These are the things that support a human being to develop well. It's kind of like the idea of the acorn and the oak tree. Humans, we're like these little acorns, and if we have the right amount of sunshine and fresh air and soil and rain, then we can develop into the best humans we can be. And the tree develops into the best oak tree it can be. And it's the same for humans. The land that we land in needs to be nurturing to us. This is true no matter what your chart says. So this chart is the list of external assets, right? External things that are supportive to a child. And down here is constructive use of time. And it's interesting, there are even some things I would critique about this model because it doesn't include nature. And I think time and nature is essential for humans to develop well, right? So it's a little bit biased towards cities and toward, Western civilized city living, but I still appreciate it for its contribution. And then in the next page, we have the internal assets. And some of these internal assets develop as a result of the external assets, right? If you have caring families, then you might learn to better care for yourself. If you have, if adults around you model integrity and honesty, you might be more likely to be honest with yourself and with your loved ones and your community. Yes, I agree, Amanda. Nature is a basic human need. And some of the reasons we were in this pickle today, in this trouble on a planetary scale, is because we haven't remembered enough that we belong to nature, that we need to be in mutual relationship with the beings of nature. So yes, so you can see here the list of internal assets: commitment to learning, positive values, social competencies, very important, right? For example, peaceful conflict resolution. Who learns that? What school teaches that? We need to be teaching that. Cultural awareness and sensitivity. We need to be teaching all of those things. And then positive identity, right? So we know that a human being is more likely to be healthy if they have all of these 40 developmental assets, the external ones and the internal ones. And indeed, Amelia, they're not, I mean, I don't know if parents are always the best teachers, but they're definitely the first teachers. And we want to help them become even better. And exactly, if not only if they are self-regulated, but if they have some self-knowledge, right? So astrology is helpful for the parent to learn to know themselves, and then to look at the children with more empathy. How many times have we seen parents they say children are mirrors, and I think this is true to a great extent. Even whether your children are very similar to you or very different from you, they mirror things back to you. They mirror back what you do. They remind you of what you were like when you were that same age, right? There's such a tremendous amount of learning in the parent-child relationship, and it goes both ways. So yes, in an ideal world, the parents are very nurturing and they are the best teachers. And because parents are the first teachers and so important, we want to use astrology to support them on their journey as well. So, yeah, the Search Institute has a lot of free resources. Feel free to check them out online. I think it's a very interesting, initiative, and at least I appreciate it because it's given me language to talk about this, right? And to acknowledge how different children, if they come from a difficult setting or an impoverished setting or a violent setting or a setting of exile, and then there are some assets missing, and how do we compensate for those? All right. So in our work, how do we mean to empower parents? We want them to understand themselves better and to have empathy for themselves. I remember when I was pregnant, I was given a due date for my child, and I looked at the astrology of that day, and she was supposed to have a grand trine in fire, and so I was looking at a very fiery child. And I am not a super fiery person. And I was like, wow, how am I going to cope with parenting this child? And in the end, I had complications. I'm a very old mom. I was pregnant at 42. I had my daughter at 42. And so the doctors were very worried about me, and we had some complications, and they kind of essentially, strongly suggested that she come out early, and she did. And she ended up having a lot of water, which for my Scorpio sun was very wonderful. And we have a lot of things in common, but this is not always the case, right? I could have had that fiery child, or, there are many parents who have a very different makeup from their own children. And so instead of allowing them instead of them coming at their children with judgment, we want them to come at their children with empathy. And that begins with that self-empathy of knowing, like, oh, this is my own makeup. This is what I'm made up of. And look at my child. This is their makeup. It's very different. So we want them to understand their child's unique nature. to remove judgment, and to increase acceptance and empathy. We want to help them navigate parenting challenges. So use archetypally appropriate answers to things like behavior problems. Not every behavior intervention works for every child or every family. So we can be more thoughtful about that using archetypal thought. Provide adequate support for learning difficulties. Yes, because this is also true, right? Children will come with their own set of challenges. This society is extremely biased against people with disabilities and learning and disabilities. And so how can we be supportive and different? How can we really take an anti-oppression stance to the situation? Yeah, I see in that comment, Mal. It's true. Sometimes parents and children who have signs in common can have a difficult relationship also. Well, astrology is vastly complex. We will look at some examples of that when we see the individual case studies that I've brought in today. And then enrich and expand children's gifts. So train their gifts, help them express their highest destiny, right? There's these beautiful words that mean highest destiny. Dharma is from the Sanskrit, Ikigai is from Japanese, and Kuleana is from the Hawaiian, Polynesian. And all of these words are a combination of what your gifts are and what your responsibilities are toward the world, right? And this is one of the things we want to help children attain, is how to match your special gifts with what is needed in the world. And this doesn't always happen through the medium of school. So I know that it's not easy to access other kinds of resources, but sometimes we really must look for those alternative places where the children are going to find their place to thrive. I am thinking right now of a friend who I met in my writing class, and she has a daughter with a very unique form of autism. Her daughter is somebody who seeks extreme sensations all the time, and so it's a very difficult child. She's a very difficult child to parent because she tends to be loud and she does things that can seem dangerous. And this has been a really difficult journey for my friend. But one of the things she did is that she found a trapeze class for this child. And this child is not afraid of heights and loves the thrill of swinging in the air, strapped to a harness. And trapeze class is her place, one of her places of thriving. So how good for this mother to have found that, right? Okay. And so we're entering into, how do we archetypally think? As an evolutionary astrologer, and all astrologers really, I think primarily about these 4 kinds of intelligences, right? Air intelligence is often the one that is respected and treasured in schools, verbal, logical, mathematical intelligence. But what about the practical intelligence of people with a lot of earth? What about the emotional intelligence of water? And what about the intelligence of the dancer and the athlete and fire? So the drive, inspiration, and life force that represents fire. So all of these things, we all have all of them. We all have all the planets. We all have all the signs, although some are emphasized, some not. But how do these intelligences show up in the children that we are working with? And so I made this chart. This is not set in stone or anything. This is just an invitation to think archetypally. And a lot of this language actually comes from Stephen Forrest, my teacher. But let's take a look, right? So Aries, the sign of the warrior. one of the developmental tasks of Aries is to develop courage and boldness. And one of the challenges is dealing with anger. So when we offer support to a child who has strong Aries, we need to, among other things, teach them how to channel their anger positively. The strategy can be adventure. And some of the activities for thriving are sports and martial arts and things like dance. So if you know that your child really has all of this physical energy that needs to be expressed, and sometimes they do it at by throwing tantrums at you, what a wonderful choice to put them, say, in a martial arts class. I was very surprised by my child. My child is not an Aryan child at all, but she developed an interest in Taekwondo classes. And our next door neighbor, who was very adventurous and very bold and not scared of anything, goes to the same martial arts classes. And it's so interesting to see the two girls in this class because our neighbor is learning self-control. She's learning self-discipline and kind of containment, both like expression, like controlled expression of physical energy, but also containment. And my daughter is learning like strength and confidence. And she really benefits from the order. My daughter has a Virgo moon. You'll see her chart in a little while. And she really benefits from the predictability of the Taekwondo class. Our neighbor, not so much. She doesn't like the predictability, but it really helps her, cope with transitions and develop boundaries, and also just really discharge physical energy. So even as we look at this chart, some of the activities that I mentioned here can be supported because they fit with a child's gifts, or because the child is lacking those things and they really need to learn them as a complement or a contradiction to what they have too much of, right? So let's see. Leah says, as an Aries rising with a Scorpio sun and stellium, I love martial arts. Yes, how beautiful. Yeah, martial arts are very helpful for lots of children, maybe all children. But I'm inviting you here then to think about it in that way, right? Does it support your gifts, or does it give you what you're missing? So let's look at Taurus, the nature spirit. Taurus, oh yeah, oh, thank you so much, Mal. This is great. We're actually almost at the case studies. So I won't read the whole chart. You can see it here. I think we can get these resources to you in a PDF or something also later. Or you can just take a screenshot of the computer if you're interested. But I'll just mention, here, say one other example, since we're in a very Scorpionic day. Scorpio, the detective or the psychotherapist. Scorpio's developmental task is the search for truth and depth. And sometimes we need to offer support teaching social skills, because Scorpios like me, we say we speak with brutal honesty. And so how can we keep the honesty and take out the brutal part? So teaching social skills is really important. Honesty is a strategy, and some activities for thriving that are very helpful are a way to express ourselves and that is private, like journaling, just like my mother gave me that journal that I could lock when I was a child. And intimate friendships, right? Close friendships where it can be like a lot of soul sharing. All right, you get the idea. Let's continue on. This is just a nice chart of the meaning of ikigai. This is a chart made for adults. This is where what you can be paid for comes together with what the world needs, what you love and what you're good at. But if we think about it in terms of children, is how can your gifts really meet the need out there without getting paid? That will come later. But of course, we also want to support children to reach a level of financial sustainability when they're older. So that'll be factored in later on. Okay, so this is how I came by our case studies of today. I just went on a very interesting camping trip through a couple of weekends ago with some of my closest friends. And they gave me permission in writing to use their children's photographs and charts to talk to you today. I will not be using the children's real names, and I won't give you their birth information, except you'll know my daughter's name because I write about her and she just happens to be mine. But now this is not a very universal sample. These are just some case studies. My friends, we all had children in our 40s and we're all psychotherapists, so there's a very strong bias there. But I just want to tell you about this camping trip we had. And these children, they're very beloved to me, and I've known them since they were very young, and some of them since they were born. So I figured, like, who should I talk to you about today? I don't want to just talk about famous people. I want to talk about regular children, and here are some of them. So here's first these two brothers. Khalil is 7, has a Taurus sun, moon in Cancer, Scorpio rising. We'll see that it all gets much more complicated when we look at the charts themselves. And here's an older brother, Tyrone, 10, Aries sun, Virgo moon, Gemini rising. But let's look at the charts. This is where it gets more interesting. I spoke to their mom, and so Tyrone's chart is super interesting. You can see first off that he's got this massive stellium in mostly in Aries, but also Pisces is involved in his 10th house. So as an Aries sun, certainly he is very athletic. He is very physical. He loves movement. He thrives in sports. But one thing that happened this summer that was very unexpected is that his mom got him involved in musical theater, and he got the main part. He got to be Willy Wonka in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. And so this was a big surprise to his mom. But of course, when we were having the astrological conversation and I talked about his 10th house planets, it all seemed to make more sense, right? Like, we know that anybody who has such an emphasized 10th house is very likely to have a very visible role in their community, to really thrive in being the center of attention, or just to be very involved on a social level and on an extroverted level. So as you can see, he has most of the planets above the horizon. He's a very extroverted child. He loves connecting with other people. He did so great in this play. And one of the things that was interesting, and that also surprised his mom, is that he has a pretty significant learning disability. He has a very rare form of dyslexia that includes much more than just transposing letters and numbers. So he's had a very difficult time learning to read and write. And now he's made progress in the last year. He's reading, but he's not writing. And also he has some difficulty with his motor skills in his hands. So mom was very surprised because she was like, wow, he has to learn all these dialogue parts and songs for the play. And even though he has difficulty with reading and writing, he learned all the parts and all the songs, and he did a beautiful job at the play. So that was just something that we all wanted to celebrate. But also, when mom said to me, I'm worried that he likes being the center of attention too much, that's when I could come in as an astrologer and say, you know what, this is part of his makeup, right? He is meant to have this very shiny relationship with his community. There are some, Chiron is part of the 10th house makeup as well. So there are some challenges there, but how wonderful that he can be supported to have this very visible role, to be, in this case, a performer. And we're not talking about a Leo type of performer. It's a different kind of performance, right? He required a lot of courage to take on this role. And so he was really living out his Aries promise through that. All right. So we're not going to, be very exhaustive here. We're just going to take a little tour of all these children's charts. This is Khalil, his little brother, who was 7. And um, something very strong that came up very strongly in the readings I did with these parents was the sibling relationship. We sometimes don't think too much about the sibling relationship in astrology, doing individual work, but it was huge. And the mother of these two said, Tyrone, everything comes easily to him. And it's all like a surprise. He just seems to be coasting by. And Khalil, he works hard at everything, but whatever he takes on, he's good at. And look at this chart. There's this grand trine in earth and another grand trine in water. There's the beautiful sun in Taurus accompanied by Mercury and Venus. This child is very practical. He works very hard at everything he does, but he's good at sports. He's good and he thrives in school, reading, writing, language, everything he's doing well in. And yet he's so fascinated with his brother. He's always trying to imitate his brother. The mom has really tried to encourage him to find his own things that he's excited about, but he just follows the brother. And one of the things that I noticed when mom was talking about that is this conjunction between the North Node and Jupiter, right? How in his path of growth, he will have a tendency to project his enthusiasm on other people who are larger than life, or who have an important role, a very visible role, but he's meant to become that person. So how can this mother support him in not just idealizing his older brother, but finding his own things to enjoy? And how can he own his self-esteem, how can his enthusiasm for himself be nurtured in this case? Okay. And then we're going to talk about the girls who came on the camping trip. Here's my daughter, Sophia. She's a Cancer sun, has moon in Virgo and Libra rising. Here's Violeta. Violeta is a triple Scorpio, and she has 2 other planets in Scorpio. So she's a super Scorpio. And her sister is a sun Scorpio with a Cancer moon and Libra rising. It was interesting to find some of those similarities between my daughter and Isabel. And let's take a quick look. So this is my daughter, Sophia. This is her chart. It's interesting that when she was younger, she really didn't like to be seen. The first time I put a Halloween costume on her when she was like 2 years old, she was dressed up as a ladybug. And as soon as people saw her and said, "Oh, what a cute ladybug," she started shrinking into the wall and she said, "Mommy, take this off of me. I don't want them to see me." So she didn't know at that time that the whole point of a Halloween costume was to be very visible. And even though, her Cancer tendency and even her Virgo moon tendency has been to be unassuming and to hang back, her 10th house sun has continued to evolve, and now she's really into playing music and she likes being seen. My daughter learned to walk very late. She was 1.5 years old and she was still not walking. And it was very telling because we would go to the park with Khalil and Tyrone and their mother. And I was at the park with my daughter, and my daughter would like hang on to my pants. Like she was standing, but she was like hanging on to my pants the whole time we were at the park. And the boys were like climbing up the slides and jumping off of tall things, and she was just so cautious. So look at her. She has such a mild personality. People called her my Zen baby too when she was little, because she was so calm. So that combination of Cancer and Virgo and Libra just made her very, very calm. You can see why I was surprised that she was interested in martial arts. And yet, of course, it's a good idea for her to be more assertive. to learn to find her own power physically, right? She has caught up greatly when it comes to physical things. Like once she started walking, she evolved really fast, but she has a tendency to be extremely cautious. And so how do we support her to be a little more adventurous or to make her world a little bit bigger? These are some of the ways. And also it was helpful for her to be camping with her friends and then to be following their lead because she doesn't have any siblings. Now here's Violeta. Look at her Scorpio stellium. This girl is so fascinating. And her sister and her mother are both Scorpios, Scorpio suns too. So there is an overabundance of Scorpio in this household. Yes. Oh yeah. So I'm almost done, Mal. Thank you so much for the time check. I really appreciate it. So one interesting thing about her, when she was very young, she was, well, she's still a highly sensitive person. She's a highly sensitive person. She's very perceptive. You can see she has very strong psychic skills. She sees ghosts, spirits in the house, and her mother has done a great job of guiding her around that. But she was a very sensitive child. She didn't like, for example, she doesn't like people clapping. So when it was her birthday and people wanted to clap or sing happy birthday, she didn't like that. So we could not do that. And it was challenging for her parents those first few years, having her be so profoundly emotional, so reactive to sounds and physical stimuli. And yet she is also thriving. She was in musical theater also, and she really enjoyed that. And sometimes before the performance, she'll have a big meltdown and she'll just express all her feelings to her mother. And then she'll, calm down and then go out there and do a brilliant job. Also, she's a very loving person. Look at that conjunction, that Kazemi Venus Sun. When she learned about the COVID pandemic and she was very concerned about others, she said, I want to defeat COVID by getting married to COVID. I want to love the heck out of COVID. And that was her response. All right. And now let's take a quick look at her sister. And this is Isabel. She's 6 years old. She'll be 7 this year. And look at her. She has a very different chart. She has, so many planets below the horizon. She's a very introverted child. And she has this first house sun. She has a Cancer moon. She's a very nurturing child. But there's also this tension here between her moon and her Pluto, for example. And one of the things that mom brought up, and by the way, I didn't suggest the topics, it was the parents who brought the topics to me. One of the things that mom brought up is that she can alternate between being very nurturing, like really forgetting her own needs and caring for others, being very caring for others, and sometimes being very aggressive and using her words in very harsh ways. For example, when she feels jealous of her sister. So she's able to say, like, one day she's just, pouring over her sister and feeding her and giving her things. And then the next day she might say, like, I don't want to have a sister, I want my sister to disappear. So one of the things we talked about here was how to support her introverted nature and how to really help her with communication so that she can have something to do with those powerful feelings and not use them to emotionally hurt somebody else, right? So, okay, this is a very, very quick tour of these charts. A couple of things I'll say just to end this almost on time is on this camping trip, we went on a very long hike. We miscalculated. One of my friends is a big hiker, and she took us on this 2.5-mile hike that had a 1,000-foot altitude change with these little children. And they were having a hard time through some of it. And my daughter fell and she skinned her knees and she was very unhappy. So we went through some very unhappy times, but then the children all made it back. uphill on the way back from this hike, and they were so happy. They started celebrating, and here they are. They're dancing and singing their victory dance. So that was a true moment of celebration. And again, it was so nice to see them interact with each other, right? Because some of this about children is about community, is about learning to get along. And you'll be pleased to see we had them doing the dishes every day. We set up a wash station, and we really wanted to support them to be responsible. And here are the three little ones who were all born the same year. These two are 7, and she's going to be 7 in November. And here they are doing the dishes together, being really responsible. And over here, they're eating by lantern light. So that's the story of the trip. And now you probably look like this because I've exhausted you. So on that note, we will end for today. And this is just a reference. I have an article about this topic in one of the professional astrology, the career astrologer magazines. I see, Amelia, I see your question. Yeah, so now we're going to do Q&A, and thank you so much for writing in. And I see your question in the chat. Thank you, everyone. The question is, should we avoid reading the outer planets in a child's chart? I like to read them as kind of part of the personality. I want to read them to illuminate personality dynamics. If each planet is like an internal organ that has its own function, we can read that, right? Like our rebel self, it's very helpful to look at a child's Uranus to see like where are they pushing back, where they're more likely to push boundaries, or where is their originality or their creativity located. I think it's helpful to read them, but not to make large predictions, frankly. I mean, I was mentioning my husband and I both have Pluto in the 4th house. I grew up with a very difficult father. My husband grew up with a very overbearing mother. And our daughter has Pluto in the 4th. When I first saw that, I was like, oh God, what does this mean? I don't know what it means. I don't think we're going to know yet. And my husband and I are both old parents. So maybe part of that is that she will lose her parents when she's still young. I don't know. It's not ethical to predict things like death in astrology. I'm not really interested in making, a lot of predictions around that. I hope that Pluto in the 4th for her means that she has some very thoughtful parents who have worked very hard to create a home that is a very safe, emotionally safe environment. But what would be the point of making, Plutonian predictions for her? I don't think that'd be helpful at this point. And Irene, I see your question too. Is the sibling relationship very different to the friend relationship? I think so. I hadn't given it so much thought, but when I did these readings for for these two mothers, I understood newly the power of birth order in a family, because the younger siblings are so impacted by their older siblings. They're so admiring of them. They have a tendency to follow them. So I think that birth order should be part of family readings, actually. Let's see. I'm going to take a look at the questions on the Q&A and help me out if I've missed any questions. Mal?
It looks like, I think as long as you did answer Pearl's question from earlier,
Okay.
let me find it in the chat.
Mm.
They had an interesting one. Do you read for teens if their parents do not know of the event?
Oh, right. I did answer that. My answer is I haven't had to do that very often, but when I do it knowing that the child is the age of consent for services in California. I do see a question here in the Q&A box that I'd like to answer, and then I'll come back to your question, Leah, that I see. Okay. So first is, have I counseled any parents who are Holocaust second generation and survivors and have third generation children? Actually, the bulk of my psychotherapy career has happened with trauma survivors. And I have worked with many people who were persecuted for political reasons, and also with cult survivors and other survivors of extreme trauma. I cannot say that I've had direct, I have friends who are second generation Holocaust survivors, and I am familiar with their situations. I haven't had them as clients, but this is the kind of work that I am specialized in doing. And in that case, of course, the historical context needs to be brought in more essentially, more importantly. We know a lot now about intergenerational trauma, and that needs to be taken into account. So thank you for that question. And then Leah, let's go to your question. Any thoughts on the charts of twins and differentiation between the two, especially if their charts are the exact same? That's a wonderful topic that I haven't explored fully. I'm just starting to explore it. But my friend Moon Zlotnick, who is also part of OPA, she's a twin. And I think she's done some more work around that. I think it's a fascinating topic. And, I'll just say, in passing, she decided to study death charts because her twin died some years ago. And that was a very life-changing experience for her. So it's very interesting how she makes that parallel. There were so many things she and her sister had in common. But when her sister died of cancer, even though Moon, is alive today, what happened to her is that she started engaging with death in a different way. She started reading death charts. So I think that's a fascinating conversation for another day. And and thank you, Mal. It looks like we have, I've heard other speakers talk about twin relationships. So I hope you can look into that some more. We know that multiple people can have the same chart or a very similar chart and express it in different ways. But I think twins are a special area of study. Indeed. Carrie is asking, would love to know what some of the key transits are in children for Saturn square. Are there others? Well, there are. I think the first Saturn square is one of the most important ones. And people also think in terms of Jupiter cycles, right? Jupiter takes 12 years to go around the chart, and it spends about 1 year in each sign, and therefore around 1 year in each house. And so people like to look at Jupiter in terms of developmental passages. I definitely, now that my daughter is 7, I'm really living that edge of growth that represents the Saturn square. It's also when children are changing teeth. So it's interesting that Saturn rules bones in the body. And there's such a jump in maturity in children at age 7. And also they're going from their baby teeth to their adult teeth. So that's a big one. But I haven't done too many readings looking at those transits for young children. Mostly what I've done is to do readings for parents when the children are just born or very, very young, as a kind of map to support them with parenting, and then those other readings with older teenagers who have more life experience and really want to talk about themselves, and those tend to have more elements also of career counseling or self-knowledge rather than emphasis on predictions. Mm-hmm. Yes, age 12 is really important. Age 12 is the tween years, like very close to puberty in many children. So that is a really great developmental leap. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you, Carrie. I haven't really explored that very much. I see this question. Do you find moon more prominent in early years and only later is sun more noticeable? I don't know that I agree with that. the way Stephen trained us, he said moon, sun, and rising sign are equally important. And I think I take my clue from just the sense that the moon and the sun, from the perspective of the earth, are the same size. So they have different functions. The moon is less conscious and more instinctual, but the truth is I see them as equally important. And I've known people who developed one or the other more a little later in their life, but I don't think there's a predominance necessarily between the moon and sun. At least I haven't seen it. And let's see, Irene, have you heard that you have an angel at 12 years, but become the devil incarnate at 14? Oh, Jupiter return versus Saturn opposition. Well, I would be careful to use the word devil incarnate. Maybe I'll use it when my daughter's 14 and I'll be deeply humbled and I'll eat more humble pie. I prefer not to pile those connotations on, but I think you're pointing out something very real, that children go through such a fast maturation at that age, and because their hormones are raging and transforming their bodies, and it's the beginning of individuation, they push their parents away a lot. Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah. People have a tendency to use that language sometimes. Yes. And what we know in the world of psychology is that it's not helpful to just distance yourself from your kids when they're in the teenage years. Like, what's really helpful is to find ways to communicate that we love them and we accept them and we're going to hang in there even if it's difficult. Mm-hmm. Thank you for the questions, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Magali, for such an awesome talk. And yeah, maybe do you have a place that is it okay to direct questions to you on Instagram?
Sure.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, you were asking me about social media. I'm not on Instagram very much. I'm on Facebook. You can find me there. My contact information is all listed in my website, www.magalimorales.com. I welcome your questions. I, I'll be there to serve you if ever that becomes useful. And thank you again for your wonderful participation and for being here today.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll be using some tips for this Scorpio dog here. So that's my kid. Yeah, she's a little emotional. So that that's
Isn't
a
it interesting that animals
oh,
have astrology too? I
yeah.
had a Virgo cat who was very clean.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, this dog has truly proved to me that the signs show up in animals for sure. So she's
Mm,
case study.
well, so give her some strong, passionate love. Great.
You both have a wonderful rest of your day, and we'll have the recording up on the website in the next week or so. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you all at the next talk next in a couple weeks or so.
Mhm. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, what a lovely morning we've spent together. Well, morning, afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Mel, for facilitating, and yeah, have a lovely rest of your day. Happy equinox, everyone.
Yes. Bye, everyone.